Well, hello, Endow ladies. We have a special treat for you today. I am here with Jen Fulwiler and our Director of Content, Katie Smith, for a very
Or
special
development.
episode today, Director of Development. Yes. And so, so why are Katie and I both here? Katie and I are both, as well as our whole team, love Jen Fulwiler. And Katie, took up. Katie, why don't you tell us the story before I kind of introduce Jen?
Yeah, no worries. So I've been a longtime listener of Jen's podcast and other communication strategies along the way. And in one of your podcasts, I think it was the one that you did on Dr. Sarno, but you said if for the first 1,000 people that gave you a review, that you would do whatever favor they ask. And I was like, I'm going to take her up on this because I hadn't heard of Dr. Sarno and I have an autoimmune disorder. And so like that information was super helpful in and of itself. Amazon lost the book, but that's a whole nother story. But then on top of that, I was like, well, hey, if we can get her on the Endow podcast, like other women need to know about her. Hello.
So Katie is texting me like, if I won this thing, would you want to interview her for the Endow podcast? Oh, well, yeah, of course. So Jen, I was introduced to you through your book, Something Other Than God, of course, and I've read One Beautiful Dream and Blue Flame last year, which was great. But if you don't know Jen, she is now also a stand-up comedian. And runs a podcast. This is Jen. So thank you so much for being on the Endow podcast. We're so grateful.
I love Endow. It's really a pleasure to be here. I really like what you guys are doing. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. And there's, of course, like so many things that we want to talk to you about. But because we're Endow, we want to ask you about the role of reading encyclicals, apostolic letters, papal documents as part of your story. So,
yeah.
And the first question I want to ask, actually, Jen, is our director of content, Laura, is like, make sure you ask her, how did she get her hands on Salve Vita Dolores? How did she find out about it?
Well, what happened was with that. So this was when I was first considering converting to Catholicism. I hadn't converted yet. And a big problem that a lot of atheists have, which is understandable, is they say, why would a loving God allow suffering? It just doesn't, I can't make that compute. I can't look at the horrors that happen in the world and say, yep, there's a God who loves us. Absolutely. That was a huge stumbling block for me. Meanwhile, at that time, I had a serious blood clot called a deep vein thrombosis in my leg, and it was very, very painful. And it was really shutting down my life. I couldn't get to the restroom without help. Honestly, I should have had a wheelchair. They never got me a wheelchair, but it was at that point because anytime I stood up, the blood would flow down to my leg and hit that clot. And the pain was actually blinding. Like I didn't know that being blinded from pain was a real thing. I'd heard the expression, but it was actually like I couldn't see. The pain was so bad. And so I was just very interested in this concept of suffering. And I had been exploring Catholicism a little bit. I didn't think that was the direction I would go. So I just Googled Catholicism suffering, things like that. I found Pope John Paul II's, what is it, an encyclical? It is, right?
It's an apostolic letter.
Oh, apostolic letter. Okay. And what was very interesting to me, coming from atheism, I always expected believers to be manipulative. And I had seen a lot of that. I grew up in the Bible Belt. I had seen, frankly, some really bad examples of Christianity and of people, their faith really was more about manipulation and control. Yeah. And so that's what I was expecting to encounter more of that in Catholicism. What I found interesting about this apostolic letter is that at the end of the day, Pope John Paul II kind of says, yeah, we don't know. God has not fully explained this. He gave a very rich answer, which brought me to essentially, if you look at the crucifix, that's the answer. The crucifix is the answer to the mystery of suffering, that God could have just stayed up on a cloud and looked down at humanity and been like, wow, what a train wreck this is. You guys are a disaster. I don't know what to tell you. But he chose to come and suffer with us and turn the act of suffering into a potentially love-generating act. That was very interesting to me. But it was also interesting that the Pope had this attitude of saying, yeah, God hasn't fully explained it. So yeah, so with some of the stuff, your guess is as good as mine. And I thought, well, that's interesting because cults and religions that try to manipulate people, they always act like they have all the answers.
Right.
And here was this church saying, look, we can only tell you guys what God has revealed to us. And he has revealed some interesting things about the mystery of suffering, but there are also some things that, I don't know, he hasn't told us, take it up with God. And I was like, wow, that is very interesting that this church really does stand by its claim that it's just taking dictation from God. It's just here to represent what God wants it to communicate to people.
Yeah, and I was so moved in studying the document. We have an Endow study on it, but I also taught a class on it. And I love that he begins the letter saying, this is our shared reflection. Like, this is something I'm going to accompany you with, and this is something that we share together because we don't have all the answers.
Right.
I love that about John Paul II, and the fact that the idea of suffering and the grappling with suffering is a truly human action, and it's something very noble, and it's something worth pursuing, and that God wants to hear it. He knows what you're going through, and he wants you to go deep into it. And this is one of the most human, most noble things that humanity can do, is to grapple with that. So, wow, that's fascinating. Laura will hear this podcast, but she'll be so happy that it was Google.
Right. It's just Google. Yeah.
It's just Google.
I didn't know any Catholics at the time. It's certainly not that practiced their faith. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know a single person who had ever heard of, who even knew what a papal letter was.
Right. What is that?
Yeah.
No, and Catholics themselves, so this is something we talk about in Endow a lot. It's not like the first thing that you think to do is, well, let me check Vatican.va.
Right.
And do a little search. And Katie, you led our, one of the panelists for our Lent study on Santa Vita Dolores, which is really vulnerable to be in a breakout room full of like strangers and
Right.
women, they're Endow women, but and then, here's all the suffering.
Yeah, we went deep quick. Like, that opened up a door I wasn't expecting. But I mean, just within the first few minutes, it was like, it got real quick.
Yeah, it's like an Endow. It's like, you don't have to do an Endow study to study Santa Vita Dolores, but if you do, okay, like things are gonna come out. Were there other? Because I think, Jen, one of the beautiful witnesses that you provide is that we're an intelligent church. We have a lofty intellectual tradition that so many more want to participate in, and we want to make it as accessible as possible without dumbing down the faith. But were there other things that you read or other documents that you thought, oh yeah, this was like really a helpful moment for me?
Oh, for sure. Well, one of the huge ones, probably the biggest one, was Humana Vitae, because I was pro-choice. Obviously super pro contraception. I didn't know. I thought it was an urban legend that Catholics weren't into contraception. I was like, that's like not being into air or water. I mean, this is a basic human need. That's ridiculous. So my plan, I thought, well, if I become Catholic, I knew I wouldn't become Catholic and not believe what Catholics believe. So I thought, I guess I just won't become Catholic because I am immovable on the issues of abortion and contraception. And then I read Humana Vitae. And man, Pope Paul VI, right, he made some predictions about what would happen in the world, the 4 predictions about what would happen if there was a widespread acceptance of contraception. And it was like writing a script of what did end up happening in the world, and that it was bad for women. And that was the first thing that got me thinking, maybe the secular mantra that contraception and abortion are just central to women's freedom, maybe there's more to this story. And maybe everyone hates the Catholic Church because it is the last organization left in the world that is willing to tell women the truth. And for example, the truth is contraception is not as effective as people think it is. By Planned Parenthood's own Guttmacher Institute, this is their research arm, found that there was a study, John A. Ross was the author of the study. It showed that it was in a publication called Family Planning Perspectives, and it showed that a woman taking a contraceptive like the pill that has about a 98% effectiveness rate over a 10-year period has a 70% chance of experiencing an unexpected pregnancy. And so I started to see that, wow, this is just not the cure-all that society makes it seem like it is. And the Catholic Church is the only one speaking truth to women. So that was a big one. And then also Pope John Paul II's letter to artists is deeply moving. Anyone who knows creative people or who has a creative bent at all, you've got to read that, because, there are a lot of Puritan branches of Christianity that are very influential in American culture. And I don't think we realize how much we are influenced by Puritan Protestant culture. And sometimes that gets mixed in with our understanding of Catholicism. And that is not what this church is about. And so I think the letter to artists is very important because it talks about just the critical importance of creativity and beauty. And, you know, Pope John Paul II was in the theater. He loved the arts himself. He participated in the arts. And that is, compared to a lot of American Christianity, that is something so beautiful and unique about our Catholic faith is, we're the ones who painted the Sistine Chapel. I mean, we understand the importance. To brag about. That beauty is one of God's attributes. And so it is very God glorifying to use your creative gifts and to add something to the world that wasn't there before. So anyone who does any kind of creative work, even using that term loosely, you've got to read the letter to artists.
Yeah, and that's one that's like we're just dying to get that on our curriculum for Endow because we're a bunch of artists back here as well, but also because it's so crucial. And in a world where truth is hard to digest, and I know Bishop Barron talks about this a lot. Beauty makes a great case for it because you can't avoid that experience of beauty, even if you can't articulate that truth and goodness are coming along with it. So that's just awesome, Jen. So Katie, I wanted to turn a little bit to you because you, as a new mom, have been really helped by Jen's podcast in a variety of ways. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about that. So we have a lot of conversations about that at Endow. Lots of new moms, lots of babies, all of that. So.
Well, just first to thank Jen for her candidness on motherhood. She has a tutorial out on how to have hot mom hair, and I actually sent it to my mom as I was watching it, and I was like, this is what is so true right now of we don't have the village anymore. And I think there's a narrative out there that's so prevalent in the Catholic world that as a mom, you have to have it all together and you have to be the one to bake cookies. And I know you said this on your podcast, your latest podcast, Jen, but to be the one to teach the faith, to teach everything, to, do the laundry, to do everything under the sun and do it perfectly. And, oh, by the way, not bother to take care of yourself, but still look perfect. And it's so damaging. And so I found it so refreshing. And I hope you've had more women who've come to you and have said this, and I hope it's actually sparked a discussion. I haven't looked at any of the blogs or comments, but I'd love to hear more of the feedback you're getting as you've been really candid about
well, motherhood. What's interesting is I started these sketches I do my goal with everything I do is to build up the culture of life. I feel like I had a near miss in my own life where I was immersed in, and this is Pope John Paul II has a term, culture of life versus culture of death. And the secular culture that says, live for yourself, don't be burdened by family or by kids. That's the culture of death, essentially, euthanasia, things like that. Yeah. And so everything I do is ultimately ordered toward building up the culture of life. And in order to have a culture of life, we have to have a culture of mess. This idea of perfectionist parenting that you just have to have it completely together as a mother, and you have to be holy and patient and keep your house clean and teach your kids how to cook and all that. I mean, women are going to fold. They're just going to break. Right. If you are actually trying to build up your family and be involved in your community and be open to life in whatever way God is calling you to do, you just can't if you don't accept some mess. So I've been doing sketches around this. And in one of them, I said the word God. I was talking about babies crying on airplanes. And I said, in a lot of cultures, the sound of a crying baby is seen as a sign of abundance and God's blessing. What's crazy, that ended up, Yahoo covered it, Yahoo Sports. It was on the front page of Good Morning America, front page of Fox News. And what's crazy is I didn't think a sketch where I talked about babies being quote unquote God's blessings would go anywhere. I just assumed that one would bomb. Right. And the hair tutorial was also picked up. The Today Show covered the last sketch I did. And I just didn't see this coming, that you could stand up for the culture of life and media will actually, I did stuff that was much more edgy, much more secular, nothing, crickets from the media. Right. And then I'd kind of go back to my Catholic roots and start building up the culture of life. And suddenly, like I just finished an interview with the Today Show that they put on the front page of their website. Crazy. So I think what this shows with the hair tutorial, with the babies on planes one, with all of these little kind of mini sketches that I put on social media, is I think there is a real hunger for that truth that we live in unnatural times. I mean, if you look at the whole scope of human history, we're living in just a tiny fraction of it. You know, people for 99.99% of human history, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have washer dryers. They didn't have economies like we have today. And of course, we're blessed to live in the modern era. It's wonderful, but we do have to understand that we are not living in the tribes and villages that we were meant to live in. So Katie, the point that you heard me making on the podcast was, it is not a normal thing for the mother alone to have to be the only role model of what it means to be a strong woman, what it means to be gentle, what it means to be kind, to teach her kids to cook, to teach her kids to do a little bit of sewing, to teach her kids, math. And normally you would live in a village where your sister and your cousin and your grandma and everybody the village children would be around to be other kinds of role models and to help them with the daily work. And we don't have that. And so we're going to have to accept a lot of imperfections in our lives because, as I said on the podcast, we are trying to do the jobs of like 30 people. And right. you are just setting yourself up for insanity and failure if you expect to be excellent at the 30 people's jobs that you are trying to do.
Yeah. And this like spirit of comparison, I think is especially prevalent in the American Catholic Church. Because as we were saying before, from my cultural context, like there's no way you would even ever think that you were going to get anything except messiness, but at least you're going to be with a community of people.
I think you should do a whole podcast where Katie, you interview Simone about, I think your background is so interesting. I would listen to that episode. That sounds amazing to hear about, to contrast the Egyptian culture that to American culture. I think that could be very interesting, especially for moms and just women generally, who've only had the American experience, to see this is not how every culture does this.
Right. Well, maybe we'll do that, and maybe we'll bring my mother on.
Yes.
Oh my God.
You must.
Yes.
I think that's wonderful.
Please bring Mama Rizkallah on.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
I think that's a great idea. I love that idea.
Well, we will dedicate that episode to you, Jen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that would be great. I'd be honored.
No, it's true. My mom's always like, what is everyone's problem? Like, she just, I remember we were kids and she just say like, yeah, you're in one or two activities. Is that enough? I'm not going to drive you. I'm gonna drive you all over town.
Right.
It's just like crazy. So, okay. So I know we got to wrap up our time. This is such a gift. We're so blessed, Jen, to have this conversation with you and to just thank you face to face for everything. I loved in Blue Flame, again, on this theme of like the spirit of perfection, the kind of killing the culture of life. And I love that you connected that. Jen, that's such a great thesis. But like the whole failure part, like you just, if you want to do God's work and God's mission and like live out of your blue flame, like just get used to the fact that there are going to be times that you fail and that you're going to feel like a failure. So who cares? Move on, keep going.
I really think the secret to life is just accepting that if you're living a good life, you are going to feel like a failure a lot of the time. And I think if you learn to embrace that and say, hey, this is a sign that I'm doing something good. I tried to, with having family time. I have 6 kids, ages 16 to 8, and we have a lot of strong personalities in the house. And so it has not been easy for me to find things that we can do as a family. And I've tried and tried again and tried again. And so often I would feel discouraged, like, man, what is wrong with it? Why are we so crazy that we can't just like spend time as a family? And then finally, in the past couple of months, I found something that we can do that we just watch movies and we kind of pause the movies and analyze them and talk about them. And it's really working. And I'm so grateful for it. But I had to go through months and months of feeling like, I guess my family is just a disaster because I cannot find anything that we can do together. But that's the sign of a good life. You're trying new things, whether it is using your God-given gift, your charism, your blue flame, whatever you want to call it. You will fail probably actually most of the time. I feel like I'm failing way more than I feel like I'm not failing in my own work. And and also same thing at home. I feel like I'm failing more than I feel like I'm not failing. And when you embrace that and realize that that's actually the sign of a life well lived, you will have so much more peace.
Amen to that. We need Jesus, right? So
Right.
I mean, he's got to come in somewhere. And if it's not
Right.
day-to-day, I did get comfort one day when I was like, gosh, one of these days I really want to be proud of my personality. But Cardinal John Henry Newman, also was feeling that way. I don't know where I read this, but he was just like, gosh, it's just time's passing quickly and I'm not really doing God's work, and just feeling that existential crisis. I was like, well, if Newman can feel that, certainly I'm not going to be spared of it. So
you're not alone if you feel that way.
Anyway, but other things I wanted to say before we say goodbye is the saint generator that you do and the word generator. Obsessive.
Oh yeah, it's fun, right?
It's so great. Every Halloween, it's just like ritual now with my friends. I used to make them handmade, little saint names. And
yeah.
But I think that's such a great little Catholic cultural thing to do, is just to have your saint of the year, or start at All Hallows Eve on Halloween, or the word generator at the New Year. Anyway, love that you did that, Jen.
Yeah, that's my programming background coming into play. That my first career was in programming, so I put it to the use of the church.
Yeah, it's been great. As a former high school teacher, it was just great, because every year, like, hand write out all these saint names, and now I'm just
right.
Let's just bring up Jen's website.
Right. Yeah, it's a much easier, much faster process.
It's much faster. So anything else, Katie, you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, just thank you so much. And for those out there who haven't checked out Jen's podcast yet, I don't know why, but you should. It's called This Is Jen, and you can find it on all of the other places that you
can. We'll link everything too. So but thank you again, Jen. This was a real delight and a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And I really love the work that Endow is doing. It's really important work, and I just fully support everything you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. Pray for us, and we'll definitely be praying for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.